Single mom watched her daughter approach the mute billionaire CEO at the wedding. When she signed "Daddy" to him, his secret past was exposed. He froze. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Lydia's fingers and shattered on the marble floor, but she barely registered the sound. Time seemed to slow as she watched her 6-year-old daughter approach the solitary figure at the corner table. Her small hands moved with fluid grace that only came from years of practice. Even from across the crowded reception hall, Lydia could read the signs perfectly. "Hello. I found you. Are you my daddy?" The man, Julian Nash, visionary architect and billionaire CEO who hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade, went completely still. His dark eyes widened in shock as they moved from the child to lock with Lydia's across the room. In that suspended moment, 7 years of carefully constructed secrets threatened to collapse. "Willow, no!" Lydia called out, already pushing through the crowd of wedding guests, heart pounding against her ribs. But it was too late. Julian's hands, the same hands that had once moved so expressively when they told each other everything without speaking a word, now raised slowly to respond to her daughter. "Who are you?" he signed, his movements precise despite his obvious confusion. Willow smiled, that bright, innocent smile that never failed to melt Lydia's heart. "I'm Willow Morgan. I'm 6. You look just like the man in Mommy's memory box." By the time Lydia reached them, she could see the color draining from Julian's face as understanding began to dawn. His fingers trembled slightly as they formed the next question, one that would change all their lives forever. "And who is your mommy?" Have you ever experienced a moment when your carefully hidden past suddenly crashes into your present with no warning? What would you do if the secret you've been keeping for years was suddenly exposed in the most public, unexpected way? This is the story of Lydia Morgan, a sign language interpreter whose quiet life with her daughter is upended when the child recognizes the father she's never met, a man who never knew she existed. 7 hours earlier, Lydia had stood before her bedroom mirror, critically assessing her appearance with the harsh judgment she reserved only for herself. The deep teal dress, a splurge she had justified as an investment piece, hugged her curves in a way that was elegant rather than showy. Her copper-red hair was swept into a simple updo, a few loose tendrils softening the effect. At 34, she looked good. Not spectacular, not like the glamorous crowd that would fill her friend Tamara's wedding, but presentable, respectable. "Mommy, are you a princess?" Willow's voice came from the doorway, filled with the kind of pure admiration only a child could offer. Lydia turned to find her daughter already dressed in her flower girl outfit, a cream-colored dress with a sage green sash that complemented Lydia's own attire. Willow stood with her hands clasped behind her back, dark curls framing her heart-shaped face, eyes wide with wonder. "No, sweetheart. But you certainly look like one," Lydia replied, kneeling to adjust the small flower crown nestled in Willow's dark curls. Curls that were identical to her father's, though Willow had no way of knowing that. "And Tamara is the princess today," Willow declared confidently, twirling to make her skirt flare out. "That's why she gets the big white dress and the fancy party." "That's right. And you, my love, are the most important flower girl in the whole world." Willow's hands moved naturally as she spoke, signing alongside her words as she always did, a habit formed from spending so much time at the deaf education center where Lydia worked. "Will there be other kids who talk with their hands?" she signed, her small fingers forming the words with a fluidity that made Lydia's heart swell with pride. "I don't think so, honey. But remember, you can always talk with your voice when people don't understand your signs." Willow nodded solemnly, her expressive eyes, another inheritance from her father, showing her understanding. At 6, she moved between the hearing and deaf worlds with a fluidity that amazed Lydia, never seeming to find it strange that she navigated 2 languages simultaneously. "Are you nervous about your big role today?" Lydia asked, helping Willow adjust her dress. "A little," Willow admitted, her fingers fidgeting with the sash. "What if I drop all the petals at once? Or what if I trip?" Lydia cupped her daughter's face in her hands. Then you'll pick yourself up, smile that beautiful smile of yours, and keep going. That's what brave people do. Like you, Mommy. Something tightened in Lydia's chest. I try, sweetheart. I try. As they finished getting ready, Lydia couldn't help but reflect on the path that had led her here, a single mother raising her daughter in a modest apartment in Portland, working at a deaf education center, her past carefully compartmentalized and stored away. A past that included a brilliant, intense summer 7 years ago. A summer that had given her Willow. Let's not keep tomorrow waiting, Lydia said, pushing away the memories. We have a wedding to attend. What Lydia hadn't prepared for, what hadn't even crossed her mind as a possibility, was seeing Julian Nash at the wedding. Why would it? Julian ran in circles so far removed from Lydia's everyday life that they might as well inhabit different planets. His world was one of international design competitions and sustainability conferences, private jets and million-dollar commissions. Hers was centered around a modest education center, where she worked as a sign language interpreter and taught ASL classes. Their paths should never have crossed again after that summer 7 years ago. The summer that had given her Willow, though Julian had no idea. The historic riverfront chapel was exactly as stunning as Tamara had promised. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on ancient stone floors. Thousands of white orchids and silver accents transformed the sacred space into something ethereal, otherworldly. The string quartet played softly as guests filed in, taking their seats among the fragrant blooms. Lydia stood with Willow in the vestibule, making last-minute adjustments to her daughter's flower crown while the wedding coordinator gave final instructions. Remember to walk slowly, Lydia reminded her, straightening the sash one last time. And when you get to the front, you stand right beside Ms. Beverly, okay? Willow nodded, suddenly solemn with the weight of her responsibility. I'll do a good job, Mommy. I promise. I know you will, sweetheart. Lydia pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'll be watching you the whole time. The ceremony unfolded like a dream. Tamara, resplendent in white lace and pearls, floated down the aisle on her father's arm, radiating joy. Her soon-to-be husband waited at the altar, his face transforming with love as he caught sight of his bride. Willow performed her flower girl duties with solemn perfection, carefully dropping rose petals along the aisle and standing quietly during the ceremony, her hands occasionally moving in small, unconscious signs as she processed the event in her own way. Lydia felt a surge of pride watching her daughter, so poised, so uniquely herself in this crowd of wealth and privilege. It was during the reception that everything changed. The ballroom of the Bridgeview Hotel had been transformed into a botanical garden with crystal decorations and living walls creating an atmosphere of ethereal luxury. Chandeliers dripped with crystal teardrops, catching and fracturing light across tables adorned with silver candelabras and lush centerpieces. A string quartet had been replaced by a small orchestra, their music floating above the gentle hum of conversation. Lydia found herself seated at the Friends of the Bride table, which thankfully meant she didn't have to make awkward conversation with strangers. She smiled as Willow carefully ate her dinner, taking small, precise bites as she'd been taught, occasionally signing her observations about the lavish surroundings. "Mommy, can I go look at the ice sculpture?" Willow asked after picking at her child-sized portion of the gourmet meal. "I finished all my chicken." Lydia glanced at the elaborate ice phoenix in the center of the room, surrounded by a display of fruits and desserts. "All right, but stay where I can see you." She watched as her daughter slipped from her chair and made her way toward the sculpture, her cream-colored dress standing out amid the sea of evening wear. It was while tracking Willow's movement through the crowd that Lydia first noticed him. Seated alone at a table in the corner, slightly removed from the festivities, was a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped thoughtfully against the table. When he turned slightly, giving Lydia a glimpse of his profile, her heart nearly stopped. Julian Nash. She would know that face anywhere. Though she had only seen it in architecture magazines and the occasional sustainability award ceremony since their time together, his features had matured over the years. The boyish visionary, now a man of 36, with subtle lines around his eyes and threads of silver at his temples that only enhanced his striking appearance. What was he doing here? Julian Nash didn't attend social functions. It was one of the many things that made him a figure of fascination in the design world. After the accident that had left him unable to speak 7 years ago, he had become famously reclusive, communicating exclusively through sign language, written notes, or his trusted business partner. With rising panic, Lydia scanned the room for Willow, suddenly desperate to keep her daughter away from that corner of the ballroom. But Willow was nowhere near the ice sculpture where she was supposed to be. In fact, she wasn't visible anywhere in Lydia's line of sight. Then she spotted her daughter's cream-colored dress moving directly toward Julian Nash's table. "No, no, no," she breathed, already pushing her chair back. She was too late. By the time she had navigated halfway across the ballroom, Willow had reached Julian's table. Lydia watched in horrified slow motion as her daughter raised her hands and began to sign to the man who had no idea he was her father. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Lydia's fingers and shattered on the marble floor, but she barely registered the sound. Time seemed to slow as she watched her 6-year-old daughter approach the solitary figure at the corner table. Her small hands moved with fluid grace that only came from years of practice. Even from across the crowded reception hall, Lydia could read the signs perfectly. "Hello. I found you. Are you my daddy?" The man, Julian Nash, visionary architect and billionaire CEO who hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade, went completely still. His dark eyes widened in shock as they moved from the child to lock with Lydia's across the room. In that suspended moment, 7 years of carefully constructed secrets threatened to collapse. "Willow, no." Lydia called out, already pushing through the crowd of wedding guests, heart pounding against her ribs. But it was too late. Julian's hands, the same hands that had once moved so expressively when they told each other everything without speaking a word, now raised slowly to respond to her daughter. "Who are you?" He signed, his movements precise despite his obvious confusion. Willow smiled, that bright, innocent smile that never failed to melt Lydia's heart. "I'm Willow Morgan. I'm 6. You look just like the man in Mommy's memory box." By the time Lydia reached them, she could see the color draining from Julian's face as understanding began to dawn. His fingers trembled slightly as they formed the next question, one that would change all their lives forever. "And who is your mommy?" Before Willow could answer, Lydia stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Her heart was hammering so violently she was certain everyone in the ballroom could hear it. "Willow, sweetie," she managed, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will, "why don't you go ask Miss Beverly for some cake? I need to talk to this gentleman for a moment." Willow looked between them, her perceptive eyes registering the tension. "But Mommy, he talks with his hands like us. And he looks like—" "Willow," Lydia interrupted, her voice firmer now. "Please go to Miss Beverly now." With obvious reluctance, Willow nodded and moved away, glancing back several times as she returned to their family table. Only when she was safely with Lydia's friend did Lydia turn to face Julian fully. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. The boyish designer she had known had been replaced by a man whose bearing spoke of authority and self-possession. Only his eyes remained exactly as she remembered, intense, intelligent, and currently fixed on her with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. His hands moved, forming words that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Lydia Morgan. It's been 7 years." "Julian," she acknowledged, her own hands shaping his name with the fluidity that came from years of professional use. "I didn't know you would be here." Clearly, his signs were crisp, controlled, but she could read the underlying tension in the tightness of his movements. "That child, she called me." He didn't finish the sentence, his hands pausing in midair. "She made a mistake," Lydia signed back quickly. "She's confused you with someone else." But even as her hands formed the denial, she knew it was futile. Julian had always been brilliantly perceptive, able to read between the lines of what wasn't being said. And Willow, with her dark curls and distinctive eyes, was the image of her father. 6 years old, he signed, his gaze intense. Born approximately 9 months after you disappeared from the university project. Dark hair. My eyes. His hands stilled for a moment before forming the next question. Is she mine? The directness was so characteristic of the Julian she had known that Lydia felt a painful twist of nostalgia. He had never been one to dance around difficult subjects, preferring clarity even when it was uncomfortable. She could lie. Claim Willow was from a subsequent relationship. Deny the obvious resemblance. Maintain the wall of secrets she built around her daughter's paternity. But standing here, facing the man whose features were so clearly reflected in Willow's, the lie died before her hands could form it. Yes, she signed, the single word carrying the weight of 7 years of silence. Julian's expression transformed, a complex mixture of emotions washing over his features, shock, confusion, hurt, and something that might have been wonder. He started to sign something, then stopped, his hands hovering uncertainly. Around them, the wedding reception continued in a blur of music and laughter, guests oblivious to the life-altering conversation happening in their midst. A server approached their table, offering champagne, but Julian waved them away with a polite gesture, his eyes never leaving Lydia's face. Why, he finally signed, the question encompassing so much more than just Willow's existence. Why had Lydia left without explanation? Why had she kept their child a secret? Why was he only learning about his daughter now, 6 years later, through a chance encounter at a wedding? This isn't the place for this conversation, Lydia signed, suddenly aware of curious glances being directed their way. Julian Nash's presence at any social event was noteworthy. His intense interaction with an unknown woman would definitely attract attention. Julian nodded once, reaching for his notepad. This time he wrote quickly, tore out the page, and handed it to her. In precise, elegant handwriting were an address and time, the Bridgeview Hotel, Suite 1125, 9 p.m. We need to talk properly, without an audience. Lydia hesitated, then nodded. She owed him that much at least. I'll come, but I need to take Willow home first. Willow, he repeated, his hands shaping her daughter's name with a reverence that caught Lydia off guard. A beautiful name. It was my grandmother's, Lydia explained, not adding that her grandmother had also been deaf, that Willow's name was one of the few connections to her father's world that Lydia had allowed. Julian's gaze drifted over to where Willow sat with Lydia's friend, animatedly describing something with both her voice and hands. She signs very well for her age. She's grown up around it. I work at a deaf education center. She's been signing since she could move her hands. Something like pride flickered across Julian's face, followed quickly by a shadow of loss, recognition of all the moments he had missed. Before he could respond, a commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. A group of photographers had somehow gained access to the reception, their cameras already raised as they scanned the room. Press, Julian signed, his expression hardening. Looking for me, most likely. I should go. The transformation was immediate and striking. The vulnerable man asking about his newly discovered daughter disappeared, replaced by the guarded, inaccessible Julian Nash that the design world knew. The reclusive genius who avoided publicity with fierce determination. Tonight, he signed, backing away from her. 9 o'clock, please come. And then he was gone, slipping through a side door with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to evading unwanted attention. Lydia stood frozen, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. After 7 years of careful secrets, of raising Willow alone while keeping the truth of her paternity hidden, a chance encounter at a wedding had brought everything crashing down. Julian knew he had a daughter, and tonight she would have to explain why she had kept that daughter from him. Mommy? Willow's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Where did the man go? The one who talks with his hands. Lydia turned to find her daughter standing beside her, eyes curious and questioning. She knelt to Willow's level, struggling to find the right words. He had to leave, sweetheart. Is he coming back? I wanted to show him my special signs. Lydia's heart constricted. No, honey. He's gone. Mommy, why did you look so scared when I was talking to him? The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze her. She took a deep breath. Willow, I need to understand what happened. Why did you go up to that man? Why did you ask if he was your daddy? Willow's expression grew solemn, her small brow furrowing in concentration. He looks like the man in your special box. The one with the pictures you look at sometimes when you think I'm sleeping. And he talks with his hands like us. She hesitated, then added with the heartbreaking honesty of childhood, I thought maybe he was my real daddy who came back. Lydia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had always been so careful, keeping the few mementos from that summer, including the single photograph she had of Julian, locked away in a box at the back of her closet. But children saw more than adults gave them credit for, noticed patterns and connections that seemed safely hidden. Willow, that was very impolite, she said gently but firmly. We don't approach strangers that way. But he's not a stranger if he's my daddy, right? The painful logic of a child. Direct, unsparing, and uncomfortably accurate. That's Mr. Nash. He's an acquaintance, not your father. The disappointment that clouded Willow's expressive eyes made Lydia's guilt deepen. She had always answered Willow's questions about her father with carefully constructed half-truths. He was someone Mommy had known briefly. He wasn't able to be part of their lives. He didn't even know about Willow. Never an outright lie, but never the complete truth either. Come on, sweetie. I think it's time for us to go home. You must be tired after all the excitement. But the dancing hasn't started yet, Willow protested. And Tamara said I could dance with the grown-ups. I know, but Mommy has a headache. It wasn't entirely untrue. Tension was building behind her eyes, the first warning of the stress migraine that would likely hit full force once the adrenaline wore off. We'll call Tamara tomorrow and explain. As they made their excuses to the bride and collected their things, Lydia's mind raced with everything that would need to be addressed during her meeting with Julian. How could she possibly explain her actions? How could she make him understand why she had kept Willow a secret? Why she had disappeared from his life without explanation 7 years ago? The drive back to their modest apartment was tense, with Willow unusually quiet in the back seat, clearly sensing her mother's distress. Mommy, are you mad at me? She asked finally, her small voice cutting through the silence. Lydia glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, heart clenching at the worry in those familiar eyes. No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. I was surprised, that's all. Because I found the man from your box. Yes, Lydia admitted, choosing her words carefully. It was unexpected. Is he going to come see us now? The innocent question hung in the air between them. Lydia tightened her grip on the steering wheel. I don't know, honey. It's complicated. Grown-ups always say that when they don't want to answer, Willow observed with a wisdom beyond her years. Lydia couldn't help but smile despite her anxiety. You're right. And it's not fair to you. How about this, let me talk to Mr. Nash tonight, and then I'll answer your questions tomorrow. Okay? Promise? I promise. After getting Willow settled with her babysitter, Lydia changed out of her formal wear, mind still whirling with the evening's revelations. She chose a simple blue dress for her meeting with Julian, professional enough for the serious conversation ahead but not so formal as to create additional distance. As she prepared to leave, she found herself standing before the special box Willow had mentioned, hesitating only briefly before opening it. Inside were the few tangible remnants of that transformative summer, a pressed wildflower from their walk in the research center's gardens, a handwritten poem he had given her, a small carved wooden fox he had created during one of their sign language sessions, and the photograph, the only one she possessed of the two of them together, taken by another researcher at a program picnic. They weren't touching in the image, but the connection between them was palpable in the way their bodies angled toward each other, in the light in their eyes as they shared some private joke. That was before she knew who he really was, before she discovered that the anonymous participant she had been assigned to work with was actually Julian Nash, the reclusive genius behind Sustainable Futures. Before she realized that the research project, and by extension, her role in it, was designed to help his company develop new accessible design principles for the deaf community. Before she felt the devastating betrayal of learning that what she had thought was a genuine connection had been, from his perspective, just part of a corporate research agenda. Or so she had believed at the time. Now, 7 years and 1 daughter later, she was about to face him again to explain why she had disappeared without a word, why she had kept his child a secret, why she had allowed Willow to grow up without knowing her father. The drive back to the Bridgeview Hotel felt both too long and too short. Part of her wanted to turn around, to grab Willow and disappear again, to protect the life they had built together from the disruption Julian's presence would inevitably bring. But she knew that was no longer an option. Julian had seen Willow. He knew he had a daughter. And he deserved to know why Lydia had kept that daughter from him. The hotel lobby was quieter now, the wedding reception winding down as the evening progressed. Lydia made her way to the elevators, her heart pounding faster with each floor she ascended. Suite 1125 would be on the top level, she realized, the luxury accommodations reserved for the hotel's most prestigious guests. When she finally stood before the door, she took a deep breath to steady herself before knocking. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed hallway. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Julian in more casual attire than at the wedding, dark jeans and a simple blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up to expose his forearms. Without the formal suit, he looked more like the man she remembered from that summer, the researcher whose identity had been kept anonymous, whose brilliant mind and expressive hands had captured her heart before she knew who he really was. "You came," he signed, relief evident in his expression. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would," Lydia replied, her hands moving automatically in the language that had once connected them so deeply. "I owe you that much." He stepped aside to let her enter, and Lydia found herself in a suite that was larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights below. A laptop sat open on a desk in the corner, surrounded by scattered papers covered in architectural sketches and notes, evidence that Julian had been working before her arrival. "Would you like something to drink?" he offered, gesturing toward a small bar area. "Water? Wine?" "Water is fine," she answered, remaining standing even as he motioned toward the comfortable seating area. Some part of her felt that staying on her feet would help maintain the emotional distance she desperately needed. Julian poured 2 glasses of water, his movements precise and efficient. When he handed one to her, their fingers brushed briefly, and Lydia felt an unwelcome jolt of awareness at the contact. 7 years had done nothing to diminish the physical reaction she had always had to his presence. "She's beautiful," Julian signed after setting his own glass down, his hands forming the words with obvious emotion. "Willow. Our daughter." The simple acknowledgement, "our daughter," hit Lydia with unexpected force. For 6 years, Willow had been hers alone. Seeing Julian claim parenthood so easily, so naturally, brought home the magnitude of what she had kept from him. "Yes, she is," Lydia agreed, her hands moving less fluidly than usual as emotion threatened her composure. "She's brilliant, kind, perceptive beyond her years. She signs exceptionally well for her age. She's grown up with it. It's as natural to her as speaking." Julian nodded, then gestured again toward the seating area. "Please sit. This conversation will be easier if we're both comfortable." Reluctantly, Lydia perched on the edge of an armchair while Julian took a seat on the sofa opposite her. For a moment, neither of them signed anything, the weight of 7 years of silence hanging between them. "Why?" Julian finally asked, the question simple but loaded with meaning. "Why did you leave? Why did you keep her from me?" Lydia set her water glass down, needing both hands free for what would be a complicated explanation. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times over the years, never truly believing it would come to pass, but now that it had, all her carefully planned words seemed inadequate. "I discovered the truth," she signed, her movements sharper than intended, "about who you really were, about the research project, about why I had been assigned to work with you." Confusion crossed his features. "What truth?" "That you were Julian Nash. That the anonymous participant I'd been working with was actually the founder of Sustainable Futures. That the whole summer project was just research for your firm's new accessible design principles." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by dismay. "Is that what you thought? That it was all just architectural research? Wasn't it? I saw the contract, Julian. The one that outlined how all interactions with Subject J would be documented and analyzed for design development." Julian's expression transformed, shock giving way to genuine distress. "No, no, that's not," his hands paused, then continued with deliberate care. "The research project was legitimate. Yes, my firm funded it, but it wasn't what you're thinking. I saw the documents," she insisted. "After Professor Rainier let your name slip, I went looking. I found the contract in her office. It specified that all sessions with Subject J, that was you, were to be recorded and analyzed for the development of accessible design principles." Julian closed his eyes briefly, a pained expression crossing his features. When he looked at her again, his hands moved with deliberate care. "The project had two components, Lydia. Yes, my company was developing accessible design principles, but my participation, the sessions with you, that was personal." "Personal," she repeated, skepticism evident in her signing. "I had lost my voice 6 months earlier in the accident. The doctors had confirmed it was permanent. I was struggling, learning to navigate a world where I could no longer speak. The research project was therapeutic for me, not just business." Lydia frowned, processing this new information. "Then why the secrecy? Why the anonymous participant charade?" "Because I didn't want someone assigned to me who knew who I was," Julian signed, his movements conveying a frustrated intensity. "I didn't want the Julian Nash treatment, the careful deference, the special handling that comes with reputation and position. I wanted someone who would see me as a person, not a famous architect. I wanted authenticity." The explanation was plausible, but Lydia wasn't ready to accept it so easily. Not after 7 years of believing herself betrayed and manipulated. "And the contract," his hands continued, "that was standard legal protection for the formal research component. But our sessions, our conversations, those weren't part of the design development. Those were just us." His hands stilled for a moment before forming his next words with deliberate precision. "What happened between us was real, Lydia. At least for me. If you've ever had a moment where your entire understanding of your past is suddenly called into question, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about life-changing revelations and the secrets we keep. What do you think? Was Lydia right to protect her daughter by keeping her from Julian's world, or should she have told him the truth from the beginning? She wanted to believe him. Some part of her had always wanted to believe that what they had shared that summer was genuine. But the hurt and betrayal she had felt upon discovering his identity had been too profound, too devastating to easily dismiss. "Even if that's true," she signed, "you still lied to me. For 3 months, you let me believe you were someone else." "I never claimed to be anyone other than myself," he countered. "I never gave you a false name or background. I simply didn't tell you I was Julian Nash. A lie of omission is still a lie." "Yes," he acknowledged, surprising her with his ready agreement. "And I was planning to tell you the truth. That last week, I had decided to explain everything, but then you disappeared. One day you were there, and the next, his hands formed the sign for vanished, the movement eloquently conveying his confusion and hurt. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. I was hurt, Lydia admitted, and angry. And then I found out I was pregnant. And she trailed off, unsure how to justify the decision she had made to keep Willow's existence a secret. And you decided I didn't deserve to know I had a child, Julian finished for her, his signing taking on a sharper edge. You made that choice for both of us. Yes, she acknowledged, refusing to look away from the accusation in his eyes. I did. Why? The single sign carried the weight of 6 years of lost fatherhood. Lydia took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. This was the heart of it, the explanation she had rehearsed in her mind over the years, never expecting to actually deliver it to Julian himself. Because I was afraid, she signed finally, her hands forming the painful truth. Afraid of what it would mean for Willow to be Julian Nash's daughter. Afraid of custody battles I couldn't possibly win against someone with your resources. Afraid of her growing up in the spotlight that follows you. Afraid of her becoming a footnote in your professional biography, the innovative architect's half-deaf daughter, inspiration for his accessible design philosophy. A perfect marketing story. Julian flinched visibly at her last statement, hurt flashing across his features. Is that really what you thought of me? That I would use my own child as a marketing tool? I didn't know what to think, Lydia admitted. I didn't really know you. That was the whole problem. The man I had fallen for wasn't Julian Nash, famous architect. He was just Julian, the brilliant researcher who communicated through his hands. Finding out they were the same person, it made me question everything we'd shared. Julian was silent for a long moment, his expressive eyes reflecting a complex mixture of emotions. When he finally responded, his signing was measured, controlled. I understand why you were confused and hurt. I even understand why you left without explanation. But keeping Willow from me for 6 years. He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. I know, Lydia signed, guilt washing over her. Looking back, I can see that my fear overshadowed my judgment. But at the time, it felt like the only way to protect her. Protect her from me? Her father? The hurt in his expression was raw, unguarded. From the complications your world would bring into her life, she clarified. Not from you as a person. Julian stood abruptly, moving to the window to gaze out at the city lights. His back was to her, making conversation impossible, a deliberate choice, Lydia suspected, to give himself a moment to process his emotions without her being able to read them in his signing or expression. The silence stretched between them, filled with 7 years of missed opportunities and misunderstandings. Lydia remained seated, watching his reflection in the darkened glass, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Once, she had known how to read his moods, how to interpret the smallest shifts in his posture. Now, he felt like a stranger wearing the face of someone she once knew. When he finally turned back to her, his composure had returned, though the pain remained evident in his eyes. I've missed 6 years of her life, he signed, the words stark in their simplicity. First words. First steps. First day of school. Everything. I know, Lydia acknowledged, the guilt nearly overwhelming now. And I'm sorry for that. Truly. Sorry isn't enough, Julian replied, his movements conveying a controlled anger. Not for this. What do you want me to say? Lydia stood as well, her own emotions rising to match his. That I made a mistake. I did. That I should have told you. Maybe. But I can't change the past, Julian. I can only decide what happens now. And what is that? He challenged. What happens now that I know I have a daughter? Do you expect me to just walk away? To pretend I never saw her? To go back to being a stranger when she's already recognized me as her father? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was fully prepared to address. What happened now? How could they possibly navigate this unprecedented situation? Before Lydia could formulate a response, Julian's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it briefly, then set it aside with a gesture of dismissal. My security team, he explained. Apparently there's been some press speculation about my interaction with you at the wedding. Nothing specific yet, but they're monitoring social media for any mentions of us together. The reminder of Julian's public profile, of the media scrutiny that constantly surrounded him, reinforced Lydia's original concerns about Willow being identified as his daughter. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she signed. "The publicity. The loss of privacy. Willow deserves a normal childhood, not life in the spotlight." "I've managed to keep my private life private for years," Julian countered. "Despite the media's interest, I would do the same for Willow." "Until you couldn't. Until some photographer caught her with you. Or someone noticed the resemblance. Or a business rival decided to use her existence against you." Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny the possibility. Instead, he signed, "So what do you propose? That I continue to be absent from her life? That we pretend today never happened?" "No," Lydia replied, surprising herself with the certainty of her answer. "No, that's not fair to either of you. Especially now that Willow knows, or suspects. She's too perceptive to be fooled for long." "Then what?" Julian's hands shaped the question with evident frustration. "I don't know," Lydia admitted, the fight suddenly draining out of her. "I don't have a perfect solution. But we need to think about what's best for Willow, not just what we want." Something in her tone or expression must have reached him, because Julian's posture softened slightly. "You're right," he signed after a moment. "Willow comes first. Her well-being is the priority." The simple agreement, the acknowledgement that their daughter's needs superseded their own feelings, was the first moment of true connection they had shared in 7 years. Lydia felt something tight in her chest ease slightly at this evidence that, whatever else had changed, Julian's capacity for empathy and reason remained intact. She asked if she could meet you, Lydia signed. "Properly. This time she wants to show you her special signs, unique signs she's created for things that matter to her." A smile touched Julian's lips, tender and achingly genuine. "I'd like that very much." "We would need to be careful," Lydia cautioned. "Take it slowly. She's only 6, and finding out about you is going to be a significant adjustment for her." "Of course," Julian agreed readily. "On her terms. At her pace. I won't push." The reasonableness of his response, so different from the demanding design genius the media portrayed, reminded Lydia of the man she had known that summer, the brilliant but gentle soul whose hands had spoken to her heart as clearly as his mind had engaged her intellect. "Tomorrow," she decided. "You could come to our apartment. It's not fancy, but it's home. Willow would be more comfortable there, in familiar surroundings." "Thank you," Julian signed, genuine gratitude evident in his expression. "What time?" 11. She's usually at her best in the morning. 11 is perfect, he hesitated, then added, "Should I bring anything? A gift?" Lydia considered this. "Nothing extravagant," she cautioned. "She doesn't need to associate you with lavish presents. But perhaps a book. She loves anything about sea, creatures or the night sky." Julian nodded, clearly filing this information away. "I understand. Something thoughtful, but not overwhelming." Another silence fell between them, but this one was less tense than before, a pause of mutual consideration rather than emotional standoff. Lydia found herself studying Julian's face, noting the subtle changes 7 years had brought, fine lines around his eyes that appeared when he smiled, a certain gravity to his expression that hadn't been there before, the hints of silver at his temples that somehow enhanced rather than diminished his striking appearance. "I should go," she signed finally. "My friend is watching Willow, and it's getting late." Julian nodded, moving toward the door. "I'll walk you out." As they reached the threshold, he paused, his hands forming one last question. "Did you ever think about contacting me? After you found out about the pregnancy?" The honesty of the moment demanded an equally honest answer. "Yes," Lydia admitted. "Many times. Especially when she was born. When I first held her and saw your eyes looking back at me. Why didn't you? Because by then I had convinced myself that it was better for her. That keeping her out of your world was the right choice. She paused, then added with painful honesty, and because I was still hurt. Still angry about what I thought was a betrayal of trust. Julian absorbed this, his expression somber. And now, he signed, the question gentle but direct. Lydia hesitated, then finished with simple truth. Now I think I may have been wrong. About some of it, at least. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was acknowledgement of her own mistakes, of the possibility that what they had shared that summer had been real after all, of the need to move forward for Willow's sake if nothing else. Tomorrow, then, Julian signed. 11 o'clock. Tomorrow, Lydia agreed, stepping into the hallway. Good night, Julian. As she made her way back to the elevator, Lydia felt as though she had stepped from one life into another, as if the careful existence she had constructed for herself and Willow had been fundamentally altered by this single evening. Tomorrow, her daughter would meet her father properly for the first time. Tomorrow, the secret she had guarded for 6 years would fully unravel. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning light filtered through the faded curtains of Lydia's apartment, casting a warm glow across the living room that belied her nervous energy. She had been awake since dawn, alternating between tidying their already neat home and trying to prepare Willow for the momentous meeting ahead. Their modest 2-bedroom apartment in the older part of Portland had never felt quite so small as it did now, knowing that Julian Nash, architectural visionary and Willow's newly discovered father, would soon be sitting on their worn but comfortable sofa. Is he coming soon? Willow asked for the third time in 20 minutes, her small hand signing alongside her words with characteristic enthusiasm. She had insisted on wearing her favorite dress, a blue pinafore with embroidered stars, and had carefully arranged her collection of sea creature books on the coffee table. Very soon, Lydia confirmed, checking her watch. 10:52, remember what we talked about? Mr. Nash is coming to get to know me better because he's my dad, Willow stated with the matter-of-fact directness of childhood, causing Lydia's heart to constrict painfully. After returning from her meeting with Julian the previous night, Lydia had made the difficult decision to be honest with her daughter, in simple terms appropriate for a 6-year-old. She had explained that yes, Julian was indeed her father, that he hadn't known about her until yesterday, that he was very excited to meet her properly, and that they would all need time to figure out what this meant for their family. Willow had accepted this information with surprising equanimity, her only real concern being whether Julian would like her special signs and if he knew anything about whale sharks, her current marine obsession. Yes, because he's your dad, Lydia acknowledged, smoothing a stray curl from Willow's forehead. But this is new for all of us, so we're going to take things slowly, okay? Willow nodded solemnly. I won't ask him for a pony. Despite her nerves, Lydia couldn't help but laugh. I appreciate that, sweetheart. The doorbell rang at exactly 11 o'clock, Julian's punctuality apparently unchanged by the years. Willow jumped up from the sofa but then hesitated, suddenly shy now that the moment had arrived. Lydia gave her an encouraging smile before moving to answer the door. Julian stood in the hallway, looking both out of place and strangely vulnerable in his casual attire, dark jeans and a simple gray Henley that somehow still managed to convey quiet elegance. In his hands was a wrapped package that appeared to be book-shaped, and his expression was a mixture of nervous anticipation and barely contained emotion. Good morning, Lydia signed, stepping back to allow him entry. Thank you for this, he replied, his hands moving with the fluid grace she remembered so well. His gaze moved past her to where Willow stood partially hidden behind the sofa, watching them with wide, curious eyes. Willow, Lydia called softly. Come say hello to Mr. Nash. For a moment, Willow remained frozen, overwhelmed by the reality of meeting her father after the excitement of anticipation. Then, gathering her courage, she stepped forward, her hands rising to sign even as she spoke aloud. Hello. I'm Willow. I'm 6 3/4. I like sea animals and stars, and I know how to count to 100 in sign language. Julian knelt to her level, his expression transforming with a tenderness that caught Lydia off guard. His hands moved in response, signing with deliberate clarity for a child still learning the language. Hello, Willow. I'm very happy to meet you properly. I'm Julian. I like sea animals too, especially humpback whales, because they sing beautiful songs underwater. Willow's face lit up with delight. They do. Mom and I watched a documentary about them. The scientists recorded their songs and played them back, and the whales answered. The ice broken, Willow's natural exuberance reasserted itself. Do you want to see my books? I put them out specially. I would love to, Julian signed, rising to follow her to the coffee table. As he passed Lydia, their eyes met briefly, a world of unspoken emotion passing between them, gratitude, uncertainty, shared wonder at the remarkable child who connected them. For the next hour, Lydia watched as Willow and Julian formed an immediate and undeniable connection. Her daughter showed him her favorite books, demonstrated her special signs for different sea creatures, and asked countless questions. Had he ever seen a real whale? Yes, on a research expedition in Maine. Did he know how deep the ocean was? Very deep, with parts we still haven't explored. Julian answered each question with patient attention, his signing perfectly adjusted to Willow's comprehension level without being condescending. Look, Mom, Willow exclaimed, pointing to a page in her favorite marine biology book. Julian knows about the giant squid. He says they have eyes as big as dinner plates. Lydia smiled, touched by her daughter's immediate comfort with using Julian's first name. That's fascinating, sweetheart. And he's been on a boat to see whales. Can we go someday? All of us. The innocent question hung in the air, a future possibility none of them had considered yet. Julian glanced at Lydia, careful not to overstep. Maybe someday, Lydia replied cautiously. We'll see. It was during a discussion about dolphin intelligence that Lydia realized something that sent a jolt of surprise through her. Julian was wearing a hearing aid, a discreet, high-tech device that was nearly invisible unless one knew to look for it. He had not worn one during their summer together, nor had he mentioned any hearing loss. Yet here he was, clearly using one as he occasionally responded to Willow's spoken words when she forgot to sign alongside them. As if sensing her observation, Julian glanced up, meeting her questioning gaze with a small nod that acknowledged her discovery. Later, his expression seemed to say, "An explanation for another time." I brought something for you, Julian signed to Willow after they had exhausted her collection of marine biology books. He reached for the wrapped package he had set aside earlier, presenting it to her with a slightly nervous smile. I hope you like it. Willow accepted the gift with reverent hands, carefully unwrapping the paper to reveal not one but two books, a beautifully illustrated guide to ocean ecosystems, and a smaller hand-bound volume with a simple blue cover. The first one is about the ocean, Julian explained as Willow examined the larger book with obvious delight. But the second one is special. I made it for you last night. Curious, Willow opened the smaller book to find pages filled with hand-drawn illustrations of signs, some standard ASL, others clearly unique and personalized. Each page featured a different animal or natural element, with notes on the origins of the signs and variations used in different deaf communities. It's a sign language journal, Julian explained, his hands moving with a touch of uncertainty. For collecting special signs. I started it with some of my favorites, but there are empty pages for you to add your own. Willow stared at the book in wonder, then looked up at Julian with an expression that made Lydia's heart twist. You made this just for me? Julian nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. Just for you. Without warning, Willow launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around Julian in a spontaneous hug that clearly caught him by surprise. For a moment, he seemed frozen, overwhelmed by the simple, trusting affection of the child he had only just discovered. Then, with exquisite gentleness, his arms came around her small frame, returning the embrace with a reverence that brought unexpected tears to Lydia's eyes. Over Willow's dark curls, his gaze met Lydia's, a silent communication passing between them. Acknowledgement of the profound moment they were sharing. Recognition of the bond that had formed instantly between father and daughter despite years of separation. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in complete silence. If you've ever experienced a moment where words weren't necessary to express what your heart was feeling, leave a comment below. The language of love often speaks louder than words ever could. "Mommy, can Julian stay for lunch?" Willow asked after showing him her room and her collection of seashells. "I want to show him how I make my special sandwich with the crusts cut off in waves like the ocean." Lydia glanced at Julian, who carefully kept his expression neutral, leaving the decision entirely to her. "That would be fine," she agreed, surprised by how natural it felt. "If Julian doesn't have other plans." "I'd be honored to try your ocean sandwich," Julian signed to Willow, who beamed with pride. Lunch was a surprisingly relaxed affair, with Willow chattering away about school and her friends, moving effortlessly between spoken words and sign language. Julian listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his genuine interest in learning everything about his daughter's life. "My friend Emma doesn't believe that whales have belly buttons," Willow announced solemnly as she finished her sandwich. "I told her all mammals have belly buttons, even if they look different from ours." "That's right, isn't it?" "Absolutely correct," Julian confirmed, his hands moving in the fluid, expressive way that had always fascinated Lydia. "All mammals are born with an umbilical cord that connects them to their mothers before birth, which leaves a mark, what we call a belly button or navel." "Ha! I knew it," Willow said triumphantly. "I'm going to tell Emma on Monday." After lunch, Willow insisted on showing Julian her special skill, a complicated cat's cradle string game she had been practicing. As Julian leaned forward, watching with focused attention as Willow's small fingers manipulated the string, Lydia was struck by how similar they were, the same intense concentration, the same slight furrow between their brows, the same delicate precision in their hands. It was almost surreal, watching them together. All the years of careful secrecy, of half-truths and omissions, dissolved in the simple reality of father and daughter sharing a quiet afternoon. The resemblance between them was unmistakable, not just in their physical features but in a thousand tiny mannerisms Lydia had never connected to Julian until now: Willow's thoughtful head tilt, her habit of tapping her fingers when thinking, the expressive eloquence of her hands. "Look, I did it!" Willow exclaimed as she completed a particularly complex pattern. "Amazing," Julian signed, genuine admiration in his expression. "Your hands are very clever." "Mom says I have artist's hands," Willow told him proudly. "Do you think that's why I'm good at signing?" Julian glanced at Lydia, a smile touching his lips. "I think you're good at signing because you practice and because you love languages. But yes, your hands are definitely special." Eventually, Willow's energy began to wane, the excitement of the day catching up with her. When she stifled her third yawn in as many minutes, Lydia suggested a rest. "I'm not tired," Willow protested automatically, even as her eyelids drooped. "Just a short quiet time," Lydia negotiated. "You can look at your new books in bed." "Will Julian still be here when I wake up?" The question carried more weight than Willow could possibly understand. Julian looked to Lydia, letting her set the boundaries. "I should probably go soon," Julian signed gently. "I have some work to finish today. But I'd like to visit again, if that's okay with you and your mom." Willow considered this, then nodded. "Tomorrow?" Julian smiled. "Not tomorrow, I'm afraid. I have meetings. But perhaps next weekend?" "That would work," Lydia confirmed, relieved by his reasonable approach and respect for their routines. "Promise?" Willow asked, looking between them. "Promise," Julian signed solemnly. "And we can video chat before then if your mom agrees." After Willow reluctantly went to her room for rest time, Lydia and Julian found themselves alone in the living room, the weight of everything still unspoken between them hanging in the air. "Thank you," Julian signed, breaking the silence. "For today." For letting me meet her. She's the one who found you, remember? Lydia responded, a small smile softening her words. I just followed her lead. She's remarkable. Julian's hands shaped the words with unmistakable pride. You've done an incredible job raising her. I've tried, Lydia acknowledged, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. She makes it easy, most of the time. The hearing aid, Julian signed, addressing her earlier observation. You noticed it. Lydia nodded. It wasn't there before. No, Julian acknowledged, a shadow crossing his features. The doctors always said it was a possibility, damage from the same trauma that took my voice. I began losing hearing in my right ear about 3 years ago. It's progressive, though slow. I can hear about 60% with the aid, less in my left ear. I'm sorry, Lydia signed, genuine sympathy in her expression. Julian shrugged, a gesture of acceptance rather than dismissal. In some ways, it brought me closer to the deaf community. Gave me a deeper understanding of both worlds. My firm's focus on accessible design became more personal. A comfortable silence fell between them, both lost in their own thoughts, until Julian's hands moved again, forming a question that surprised her with its directness. Where do we go from here, Lydia? She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I don't know exactly. This is all happening so fast. Yesterday morning, you weren't part of our lives. Now I'm Willow's father, he completed, his expression solemn. And I want to be part of her life. In whatever way works best for her. And logistically? Lydia questioned. Your life is in New York. Your company, your responsibilities. I can work from anywhere much of the time, he replied. And Portland is only a flight away. I could come weekends, perhaps a weekday evening for dinner sometimes. To start with, at least. The qualifier at the end caught Lydia's attention. To start with? Julian hesitated, then signed with careful precision. Eventually, we would need to consider more formal arrangements. Legal recognition of paternity, perhaps shared custody of some kind. But not right away. I understand this needs to happen gradually, on Willow's timeline. The reasonable nature of his proposal, the lack of demands or legal threats she had once feared, both reassured and surprised Lydia. You're being very measured about this. I've had a night to process the initial shock, Julian signed, a hint of wry humor in his expression. And I've spent years making strategic decisions. I know that demanding too much too quickly would be counterproductive for everyone, especially Willow. And the publicity aspect? Lydia asked, voicing her greatest concern. The media attention that would come if Julian Nash suddenly revealed he had a 6-year-old daughter. We can be discreet, at least initially. I've managed to keep most of my private life out of the press despite public interest. My security team is experienced in maintaining privacy. He paused, studying her face. But eventually, yes, there would likely be some attention. We would need to prepare Willow for that possibility. The thought still made Lydia's stomach clench with anxiety, but she recognized the truth in his words. If Julian was to be part of Willow's life in any meaningful way, some degree of public scrutiny was probably inevitable. One step at a time, she signed finally. We'll need to be careful, thoughtful about how we proceed. Agreed, Julian's gaze shifted to the hallway where Willow's room was located. She seems so well adjusted, confident, happy. She is, Lydia confirmed, following his gaze with maternal pride. She has her moments like any child, but overall, she's remarkably resilient, adaptable. Has she ever struggled with questions about her father? The question held a vulnerability that caught Lydia off guard, genuine concern rather than accusation. Sometimes, she admitted. More recently as she's gotten old enough to notice other family structures. She's asked why she doesn't have a dad like some of her friends do. What did you tell her? That families come in all different forms. That some children have a mom and dad. Some have two moms or two dads. Some are raised by grandparents or other relatives. That our family was special because it was just the two of us, but that didn't make it any less a family. Julian nodded slowly, absorbing this. And about me specifically? I told her that her father was someone I had known briefly, that he wasn't able to be part of our lives, and that he didn't even know about her. Lydia met his gaze directly. I never told her you were dead or that you had abandoned her. I never wanted her to think she was unwanted. Thank you for that, Julian signed, genuine gratitude in his expression. For protecting her from hurt even when you were angry with me. She's innocent in all this, Lydia replied simply. Whatever happened between us, none of it was her fault. As Julian prepared to leave, Willow insisted on saying goodbye, emerging from her room, with sleep-tousled hair and drowsy eyes. You're really coming back next weekend? She asked, looking up at Julian with an expression that made his hands falter slightly before responding. Absolutely, he signed. I promise. And maybe we can video chat before then? I want to show you my special sign for constellation. I made it up myself. I'd like that very much, Julian assured her, kneeling to her level. If your mom says it's okay. Willow looked to Lydia, who nodded. We can arrange a time. Without warning, Willow hugged Julian again, this time with a sleepy naturalness that suggested she'd already accepted his place in her life. Bye, Julian. I'm glad you're my dad. Julian's arms tightened around his daughter, his eyes meeting Lydia's over Willow's head. The raw emotion in his expression took her breath away, gratitude, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness that mirrored her own feelings for their child. I'm glad too, he signed when Willow released him. More than I can say. After Julian left, promising to call the next day to arrange their video chat, Willow curled up on the sofa next to Lydia, leafing through her new sign language journal with reverent fingers. I like Julian, she announced simply. He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby. And he knows lots of things. Yes, he does, Lydia agreed, stroking her daughter's hair. Is he going to be part of our family now? Like, forever? The innocent question carried implications Lydia wasn't ready to fully address. He's your father, sweetheart. That doesn't change. How he fits into our lives is something we'll figure out together, over time. Willow considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. I think he's sad. Sad? What makes you say that? His eyes. Sometimes they look happy when he's talking to me, but then they get sad, like he's remembering something that hurts. Lydia was continually amazed by her daughter's perceptiveness. I think he's sad about missing so much of your life. About not knowing you until now. But that wasn't his fault, Willow pointed out with the straightforward logic of childhood. He didn't know about me. No, he didn't, Lydia acknowledged, guilt washing over her again. Then why are you sad too, Mommy? Lydia blinked, surprised by the observation. Am I sad? Sometimes. When you look at Julian and think I'm not watching. Lydia took a deep breath, considering how to explain the complex emotions swirling inside her. It's complicated, sweetheart. Julian and I knew each other a long time ago, and then we were apart for many years. Now we have to learn how to be in each other's lives again, for your sake. That's a big change. But changes can be good, right? Like when we moved to the new apartment and I got my big girl bed. Lydia smiled, hugging her daughter close. Yes, changes can definitely be good. We just need time to adjust. That night, after Willow was asleep, Lydia found herself standing at her bedroom window, staring out at the city lights. The day had gone better than she could have imagined. Julian had been patient, respectful of boundaries, genuinely engaged with Willow. Their daughter had accepted him with the open-hearted acceptance only children seemed capable of, forming an immediate connection that both warmed Lydia's heart and sent a pang of something like jealousy through her. For 6 years, it had been just the two of them against the world. She had been everything to Willow, mother, father, provider, protector. Now, almost overnight, Julian had entered their carefully constructed universe, and nothing would ever be quite the same. Her phone chimed with a text message. Julian, thank you again for today. Willow is extraordinary. You should be very proud. Lydia hesitated, then typed back. Lydia, I am. She seemed to really connect with you. Julian, the feeling is mutual. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to find words adequate to express what today meant to me. I'm failing. Lydia smiled despite herself. Lydia, you don't need words. I saw your face when she hugged you. Julian, my security team sent an update. There are some photos circulating from the wedding. Nothing connecting me to Willow yet, but there's speculation about you. I'm sorry. The message sent a chill through Lydia. Lydia, what kind of speculation? Julian, just wondering who the mystery woman is that I was speaking with so intently. Nothing specific. My team is monitoring the situation. Lydia, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Julian, I understand. We'll be careful. One step at a time, remember. Lydia, yes. One step at a time. Julian, good night, Lydia. Thank you for giving me today. Lydia set the phone down, conflict churning inside her. Part of her wanted to pack their bags, grab Willow, and disappear again, start over somewhere new where Julian and his high-profile life couldn't intrude. But another part, a part she had tried to silence for 7 years, remembered the connection they had once shared, the ease of understanding, the sense of being truly seen in a way she had never experienced with anyone else. And then there was Willow, who had already formed an attachment to her newly discovered father. Could Lydia really take that away from her now? The following days brought a new rhythm to their previously predictable life. True to his word, Julian called via video chat several evenings, his face lighting up with genuine delight when Willow showed him her special signs and told him about her school day. He listened with focused attention to her stories about classroom adventures and playground politics, offering gentle advice when asked and clearly treasuring every detail she shared. Lydia found herself watching these interactions with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite untangle. Joy at Willow's happiness, relief that Julian was proving to be the attentive father she had hoped for, anxiety about the future and what it might hold, and something more complicated when she caught glimpses of the man she had once known so intimately. On Wednesday evening, after tucking Willow into bed following her nightly video chat with Julian, Lydia's phone rang. Julian's name flashed on the screen. Is everything okay? She asked after answering, automatically signing even though he couldn't see her. Everything's fine, Julian replied, his signs clear in the video frame. Willow's just fallen asleep. I wanted to talk to you about something. What is it? My team has identified a potential problem. A tabloid reporter has been asking questions at the Bridgeview Hotel, trying to find out who was staying in the suite next to mine the night of the wedding. Lydia felt her stomach drop. Do they know about Willow? No, nothing like that yet. But they're digging, and it's only a matter of time before someone makes a connection. I think we need to consider being proactive rather than reactive. What do you mean? Julian's hands moved with careful precision. A controlled statement. Acknowledging that I've recently discovered I have a daughter. Asking for privacy as we navigate this new family relationship. Setting the narrative ourselves rather than letting speculation run wild. The suggestion made logical sense, but Lydia couldn't help remembering her original fears about Willow being thrust into the public eye. And what happens then? Paparazzi following her to school. Reporters asking invasive questions. Her classmates treating her differently because her father is Julian Nash. Those concerns are valid, Julian acknowledged. But consider the alternative. If the media discovers the story on their own, without our guidance, the narrative could be much more sensationalized. Billionaire's secret love child makes a more dramatic headline than Julian Nash welcomes relationship with previously unknown daughter. He had a point, Lydia had to admit. Controlling the narrative would at least give them some agency in how the story was presented. What does your security team advise? A brief factual statement followed by no further comment or engagement. They also suggest some additional precautions: security monitoring for your apartment building, a more secure communication system for our calls and messages, perhaps temporary enrollment in a school with better privacy protocols for Willow if media interest becomes intense. The practical reality of these suggestions, the transformative impact they would have on their quiet life, sent a wave of panic through Lydia. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she signed, her movements conveying her distress. "This disruption, this invasion of privacy. Willow doesn't deserve to have her life turned upside down because of who her father happens to be." Julian's expression softened with understanding. "I know, and I'm sorry. If there were a way to be part of her life without these complications, I would choose it in a heartbeat. But my public profile makes that impossible. So what are we supposed to do? Just accept that our privacy is collateral damage to your celebrity?" The question was harsher than she'd intended, but Julian didn't flinch from it. "No," he signed firmly. "We adapt. We prepare. We make thoughtful decisions together about how to protect Willow while still allowing her to have a relationship with her father." He paused, then added with gentle directness, "Unless you're suggesting I should remove myself from her life to avoid these complications." The suggestion hit Lydia like a physical blow. After seeing the bond that had formed between Julian and Willow, the joy their relationship brought to her daughter's life, could she really consider severing that connection to preserve their privacy? "No," she signed finally. "That's not what I want. It would hurt her too much now." Relief washed over Julian's features. "Thank you," he signed, and those two simple words carried the weight of his emotion. "We'll figure this out, Lydia. Together." Parents often face impossible choices when trying to protect their children. If you've ever had to balance competing needs for your child's well-being, hit that like button and share your experience in the comments. Would you sacrifice privacy for family connection? Despite Julian's reassurance, the weeks that followed were tense. His PR team issued a brief, carefully worded statement confirming that he had recently discovered he was the father of a young daughter and was building a relationship with her while respecting her privacy. The statement included a firm request that the media refrain from intrusive coverage out of consideration for the child's well-being. For a short time, it seemed to work. Media coverage was relatively restrained, focused more on Julian's previously unknown paternity than on identifying Willow or Lydia specifically. But the respite was temporary. 3 weeks after the initial statement, a tabloid ran a front-page story featuring long-lens photographs of Julian, Lydia, and Willow at the Portland Children's Museum. The headline, "Secret Family Revealed," was accompanied by speculation about their relationship and invasive details about Lydia's career and background. The impact was immediate and disruptive. Reporters appeared outside Lydia's apartment building and the education center where she worked. Willow's school called to report photographers attempting to take pictures during recess. Lydia's social media accounts were flooded with message requests from journalists seeking comments or interviews. "We need to move you temporarily," Julian insisted during an emergency video call. "Just until the initial interest dies down. I have a house in Connecticut in a gated community with security. You and Willow would be safe there. Leave our home. My job. Willow's school. That's not a solution, Julian. That's running away from the problem. It's a tactical retreat," he countered. "Give my legal team time to send cease and desist letters. My security team time to establish better protocols. A few weeks at most." Lydia shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. "And then what? Come back and hope they've lost interest? This is our life, Julian. We can't just put it on hold whenever the media decides we're newsworthy." Before he could respond, Lydia's phone buzzed with a text from Willow's teacher. "Media outside school again. Principal called police, but they're on public property. Can you arrange alternate pickup?" The reality of the situation hit Lydia with renewed force. This wasn't just an abstract concern anymore. It was affecting Willow directly, intruding on the safe, stable environment Lydia had always striven to provide. What about Willow in all this? She signed to Julian, her movements sharp with worry. How do we explain to a 6-year-old why strangers are suddenly interested in taking her picture? Why she can't play outside normally? Why her classmates are asking questions about her famous father? Julian's expression was pained. I don't have perfect answers, but I do know that hiding from the situation won't make it better. We need to address it directly, help her understand in age-appropriate terms, and provide her with tools to navigate it. Tools. She's 6 years old. She shouldn't need tools to navigate media intrusion. I agree, Julian signed, his expression somber. But this is the reality we're facing. And I believe that with proper support and explanation, Willow can handle more than we might think. She's remarkably perceptive and adaptable. Before they could discuss further, there was a knock at Lydia's door, her neighbor, who had agreed to bring Willow home from school to avoid the media presence. When Willow entered the living room and saw Julian on the video screen, her face lit up with excitement. Dad! Guess what? There were people with cameras at school today. Ms. Thompson said they wanted to take my picture because my dad is famous. Are you really famous? Like a movie star? The innocent question hung in the air as both adults exchanged a look of shared concern. This was the moment they had been dreading, the point at which media interest directly impacted Willow's understanding of her world. Not like a movie star, Julian signed carefully. But yes, some people know who I am because of my company and the buildings we design. That's why they're interested in you too. Because you're my daughter. Willow considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness. Is that why Mom looks worried all the time now? Because people want to take my picture. Lydia knelt beside her daughter, signing as she spoke. Yes, sweetheart. I'm concerned because those people aren't being respectful of our privacy. They're being intrusive, which means they're bothering us when they shouldn't be. Are they bad people? Not bad, Julian interjected from the screen. Just doing their jobs in a way that isn't very considerate. But it's not something you need to worry about. Your mom and I are working on a plan to handle it. Willow looked between them, her perceptive gaze taking in their obvious concern. Is it because of me? Because you found out I'm your daughter? The question broke Lydia's heart. No, sweetheart. It's not your fault at all. It's just a complicated grown-up situation. But if I wasn't your daughter, Willow persisted, turning to Julian on the screen, then no one would be bothering Mom with cameras, right? The painful logic of a child, direct, unsparing, and uncomfortably accurate. Lydia saw Julian flinch visibly at the implication. Before either of them could formulate a response, Willow continued with the devastating simplicity of childhood. Maybe it would be better if you weren't my dad for a while. Just until the camera people go away and Mom stops looking scared. The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room, leaving only the echo of her daughter's well-intentioned but heartbreaking suggestion. On screen, Julian's expression reflected shock, pain, and a deep sadness that transcended their digital connection. Willow, he signed finally, his movements gentle but firm. That's not how being a father works. I am your dad always, no matter what. The cameras and the people being intrusive, that's a problem for the grown-ups to solve. It's not something you need to fix by giving up our relationship. But Mom is upset, Willow insisted, her young face serious with concern. I don't like it when Mom is upset. I know, sweetheart, Lydia signed, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. But your dad is right. This isn't something you need to worry about or try to fix. We're the grown-ups, and we'll figure it out together. Over Willow's head, her eyes met Julian's on the screen. A moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Whatever their past misunderstandings, whatever complications their current situation presented, they were united in this, protecting their daughter from feeling responsible for adult problems. "Tell you what," Julian signed when Willow turned back to the screen. "How about I come to Portland tomorrow instead of waiting until the weekend? We can have a family meeting, all three of us, and make a plan together. Would that help you feel better?" Willow nodded, some of the worry easing from her expression. "Can we have pizza at the meeting? Dad says important meetings always have good food." A smile touched Julian's lips, though his eyes remained troubled. "Absolutely. The best pizza in Portland." After getting Willow settled with a book in her room, Lydia returned to the video call, finding Julian still waiting, his expression grave. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she signed, not bothering to hide her distress. Her feeling responsible, thinking she needs to fix adult problems. "I know," Julian agreed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "But her suggestion, it caught me off guard. The idea of stepping back from her life now that I've just found her would be devastating," Lydia finished for him, surprising herself with the certainty of her assessment. Despite her concerns about the media attention, she could no longer deny the importance of Julian's presence in Willow's life, or the pain his absence would cause. "For both of you. What do we do?" Julian asked, the simple question carrying the weight of their shared responsibility. Lydia took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "We do exactly what you suggested. We make a plan, a real sustainable plan for how to move forward as a family while managing the public interest, not hiding, not running away, but not allowing it to disrupt Willow's sense of security either." Together, Julian signed, the single word both a question and a promise. Together, Lydia confirmed. True to his word, Julian arrived in Portland the following morning, having taken a private helicopter to avoid the reporters who had begun staking out the train station. The family meeting was held around Lydia's kitchen table with pizza, as promised, and a notebook for writing down ideas and concerns. "The way I see it," Julian signed, "we have three main challenges. Managing media interest, maintaining Willow's normal routines, and ensuring her emotional well-being through all of this." "And our options?" Lydia asked, impressed despite herself by his methodical approach. "We could relocate temporarily, as I suggested before, or we could stay and implement additional security measures." He hesitated, then continued with evident reluctance. "Or I could reduce my visits, make them less regular and predictable to minimize media interest." "No," Willow protested immediately. "I don't want fewer visits." "Neither do I," Julian assured her quickly. "I'm just presenting all the options. What about a fourth option?" Lydia suggested, an idea taking shape as she signed. "What if instead of hiding or changing our behavior, we make this less interesting to the media?" "How would we do that?" Julian looked intrigued. "By being boring," Lydia explained. "No drama, no secrecy, no cat and mouse games with photographers. We establish a routine that includes you as a regular part of our lives, not a mysterious visitor. Controlled transparency." Julian nodded slowly. "It could work. The media loses interest when there's no mystery, no scandal to uncover." "Exactly. We can't stop them from taking pictures or writing stories initially, but we can make those stories so mundane that they're not worth pursuing." As they discussed the practical aspects of this approach, which would include a more formal acknowledgement of their co-parenting arrangement, regular but low-key visits from Julian, and age-appropriate preparation for Willow about potential public interest, Lydia found herself studying Julian's face. The intensity of his focus, the evident commitment to finding a solution that worked for all of them reinforced her growing realization that he had indeed changed from the ambitious young researcher she had known 7 years ago. "What about your company?" she asked when they had outlined the main components of their plan. "Won't this affect sustainable futures somehow? Your board, your investors?" A shadow crossed Julian's features. "There will be questions, certainly, perhaps some concerns about my focus or commitment. But I've built enough credibility over the years to weather this. He paused, his gaze moving to Willow, who was happily drawing a picture of their family plan at the other end of the table. And if push came to shove, if it came down to a choice between the company and being part of her life, there's no question which I would choose. The simple declaration, made without hesitation or qualification, caught Lydia by surprise. This was not the Julian she had feared all these years, the ambitious CEO who would prioritize his corporate empire over personal connections. This was a man who had grown, evolved, learned to recognize what truly mattered. It won't come to that, she signed, surprising herself with the certainty in her movements. We'll find a balance that works for everyone. And remarkably, over the following months, they did. The implementation of their boring family strategy, combined with Julian's legal team's vigorous protection of Willow's privacy, gradually reduced media interest to manageable levels. There were still occasional photographs, still moments of unwelcome attention, but the frenzy of those first weeks subsided into a low-level awareness that could be navigated with proper preparation and support. Julian became a regular, unremarkable presence in their lives, coming for weekend visits, attending Willow's school events when his schedule allowed, even joining them for dinner on Wednesday evenings when he was in Portland for business. The transition wasn't always smooth. There were adjustments to routines, negotiations about boundaries, occasional misunderstandings that required careful communication to resolve. But through it all, one thing remained constant, their shared commitment to Willow's well-being above all else. It was during a quiet evening in late summer, nearly 6 months after their unexpected reunion at the wedding, that something shifted between Lydia and Julian. Willow had fallen asleep on the sofa after an exhausting day at the beach, her small form curled trustingly against Julian's side as he read her favorite book about ocean creatures. With infinite gentleness, he had carried her to her bedroom, tucking her in with a tenderness that brought unexpected tears to Lydia's eyes. When he returned to the living room, finding Lydia collecting the scattered shells and pebbles from their beach excursion, their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding, acknowledgement of how far they had come from those first tense, uncertain days. "She's happy," Julian signed, his movements conveying a depth of emotion that transcended the simple words. "Secure. Loved. That's because of you," Lydia replied. "The foundation you built." "It's because of both of us now," Julian corrected, his hands forming the signs with quiet certainty. "She needs you in her life. I see that clearly now." Julian moved closer, his expression serious but gentle. "And what about you? What do you need?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither had dared to address during the months of careful co-parenting. Lydia felt her heart rate quicken, aware that her answer could fundamentally change the delicate balance they had established. "I need," her hands hesitated, then continued with deliberate honesty. "I need to know if what we had that summer was real. Before I discovered who you were. Before everything fell apart." Julian's gaze never left hers as he signed his response. "It was the most real thing I had ever experienced. That's why I was going to tell you everything that last week, who I was, the company, my plans for the future. I wanted to ask you to be part of it all. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Fear," he admitted simply. "Fear that once you knew I was Julian Nash, CEO, you would see me differently. That the connection we had formed would be overshadowed by my public identity, my wealth, my position. I wanted you to know me, really know me, before that became a factor. And now?" Lydia asked, her hands forming the question before she could reconsider. "What do you want now?" Julian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the subtle flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. "I want what I've always wanted," he signed, his movements intimate in the quiet living room. "A chance to build something real with you. Not just as Willow's parents, but as us. Lydia and Julian." "It would be complicated," she signed, though her expression belied the caution in her words. "Our history, our different worlds, the public scrutiny." "Yes," he agreed, a smile touching his lips. "Complicated. Challenging." Worth it. The last two words hung between them, a question and an answer simultaneously. With deliberate slowness, Julian raised his hand to her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek in a touch that asked permission as much as it expressed tenderness. Lydia leaned into the contact, her eyes closing briefly at the rush of emotion the simple gesture evoked. When she looked at him again, her hands moved in a response that required no translation, no interpretation. Worth it. His kiss, when it came, felt like both a homecoming and a new beginning, acknowledgement of their complicated past and promise of a future they would build together. His hands framed her face with exquisite gentleness, while hers came to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally drew apart, Julian's hands moved in the signs that had always been their most intimate form of communication, the language that had connected them even when words failed. "I never stopped loving you," he signed, the movement simple but profound. "Even when I thought I'd lost you forever." "I tried to stop loving you," Lydia admitted, her own hands equally honest in the privacy of their shared language. "For Willow's sake. For my own protection. But I never quite succeeded." Their second kiss was deeper, a sealing of promises unspoken but understood. When Julian's phone buzzed with a message from his driver waiting outside, they reluctantly separated, both aware that this new dimension to their relationship would need to develop at its own pace, with careful consideration for Willow's adjustment. "I should go," Julian signed, though his expression made it clear that leaving was the last thing he wanted to do. "We have time now. No need to rush." Lydia nodded, appreciating his restraint. "One step at a time. For all of us." At the door, he paused, his hands forming one last question. "Would you and Willow consider visiting New York next weekend? I'd like to show you both my home. Introduce Willow to Algorithm." A smile touched his lips as he added, "The cat has claimed my home office as her domain. She sleeps on my keyboard during video calls." "I think we'd like that," Lydia signed, returning his smile. "Willow has been curious about where you live. And you?" His gaze was warm, affectionate. "Are you curious too?" "About many things," she admitted. "Your home is just one of them." His smile widened at her response. "Until next weekend, then." Life rarely offers perfect solutions or uncomplicated paths forward. But sometimes, if we're fortunate, it provides second chances, opportunities to revisit choices made in haste or fear, to rebuild connections we thought irrevocably broken, to create families in forms we never anticipated. As Lydia watched Julian walk toward the elevator, his tall frame moving with a quiet confidence that had always been part of his presence, she felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in 7 years, as if the circle that had been broken with her abrupt departure that summer had somehow, against all odds, begun to mend itself. Not returning to what it had been, but reforming into something new, something stronger for having been tested by time and misunderstanding. In the days leading up to their New York visit, Lydia found herself oscillating between excitement and anxiety. The prospect of seeing Julian's world, the life he had built separate from her and Willow, filled her with a curious mix of anticipation and trepidation. It was one thing to welcome him into their modest Portland apartment, but quite another to step into the realm of Julian Nash, visionary architect and CEO. Willow, by contrast, exhibited nothing but unbridled enthusiasm, packing and repacking her small suitcase 3 times to ensure she had included all the essential items to show Julian, her favorite seashells, her sign language journal with new entries, and a school project on ocean conservation that had earned her a gold star. "Do you think Algorithm will like me?" she asked as Lydia helped her fold her favorite sweater. "I'm sure she will," Lydia assured her. "Cats can be a little shy with new people, but they're good judges of character." "What does that mean?" "It means they can tell when someone is kind and gentle," Lydia explained, tucking a pair of socks into the corner of the suitcase. Willow considered this with characteristic seriousness. "Like how you could tell Dad was a good person even before you knew he was famous." The innocent question caught Lydia off guard. She paused, folding a small T-shirt with unnecessary precision as she gathered her thoughts. Yes, something like that, she admitted. Your dad has always had a kind heart. That's one thing that hasn't changed. Even though you were mad at him for a long time. I wasn't really mad at him, sweetheart. I was. Lydia searched for words a 6-year-old could understand. I was confused. And scared. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared, even when they're trying to do the right thing. Like keeping me a secret? Willow asked, her perceptive eyes fixed on Lydia's face. Lydia nodded, a familiar pang of guilt washing over her. Yes. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong not to tell your dad about you. Everyone deserves to know their family. Willow digested this, then nodded with the solemn acceptance children sometimes display in the face of adult fallibility. It's okay, Mom. Dad's not mad anymore. He told me sometimes people do the wrong things for the right reasons. Lydia felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. When did he tell you that? During our video chat yesterday. I asked him if he was sad that he didn't know me when I was a baby. Willow continued arranging her stuffed sea otter in the suitcase. He said he was sad about missing those times, but that he understood why it happened, and that now we get to make new memories together. The wisdom and compassion in Julian's response to what must have been a painful question struck Lydia forcefully. While she had been worrying about their complicated adult relationship, Julian had been thoughtfully navigating the equally complex emotional terrain with their daughter. Your dad is a very smart man, she said finally. Willow nodded in agreement. That's why he builds such cool buildings. Their flight to New York the following morning was Willow's first time on an airplane, an experience made considerably more comfortable by the private jet Julian had arranged. While Lydia had initially balked at such luxury, Julian had gently pointed out that commercial air travel would expose them to potential media attention, not to mention the challenges of explaining to fellow passengers why a 6-year-old was enthusiastically signing to her mother throughout the flight. Willow spent the journey with her face pressed to the window, exclaiming over the miniature world below and peppering the flight attendant with questions about altitude, cloud formation, and the mysterious workings of the beverage cart. Mom, look, she called, pointing out the window as they began their descent. The buildings look like Dad's models. Lydia leaned over to see the Manhattan skyline emerging through wisps of cloud, steel and glass towers catching the morning sunlight. Among them, she knew, were several distinctive structures that bore Julian's unmistakable design philosophy, buildings that blended function and beauty while incorporating elements of universal accessibility. A sleek black car was waiting for them when they landed, the driver holding a discreet sign that read simply, Morgan Family. The consideration in that detail, acknowledging them as a unit, while respecting their separate identity from Julian, was not lost on Lydia. As they drove into the city, Willow's excitement reached new heights. Her hands flew in rapid signs and spoken exclamations as she pointed out landmarks she recognized from books and movies, the Empire State Building, Central Park, the distinctive Flatiron Building. Is Dad's house a skyscraper? She asked, craning her neck to see the tops of the towers they passed. Lydia smiled. I don't think so, sweetheart. But I've never been there, so we'll find out together. The car eventually turned onto a tree-lined street in what Lydia recognized as the West Village, an area of historic brownstones and cobblestone streets that seemed almost anachronistic amid the surrounding high-rises. They pulled up before a 4-story townhouse, its classic facade meticulously preserved while subtle modernizations, particularly in the fenestration, hinted at the architect's touch. Before the driver could even open their door, the front entrance to the townhouse swung wide, and Julian appeared, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy that made Lydia's heart beat faster. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that complemented his salt and pepper hair, and his hands were already moving in welcome as he descended the steps to greet them. You're here, he signed, his movements conveying more emotion than the simple words. Welcome. Dad. Willow exclaimed, launching herself from the car and into his arms with the unself-conscious enthusiasm only children can muster. We flew above the clouds. And I saw buildings that look like yours. And the pilot let me see the cockpit before we took off. Julian hugged her tightly, his eyes closing briefly in an expression of pure contentment before he set her down to respond. That sounds like quite an adventure. I want to hear all about it. His gaze shifted to Lydia as she stepped from the car, and something in his expression, a mixture of happiness, uncertainty, and hope, made her feel suddenly shy, as if they were meeting for the first time. The flight was lovely, she signed. Thank you for arranging it. Of course, he replied, his movements warm with affection. I'm glad you're both here. There was an awkward moment as they stood on the sidewalk, neither quite sure of the appropriate greeting given their evolving relationship. Finally, Julian leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, casual enough to seem natural in front of Willow, intimate enough to acknowledge what had passed between them before his departure from Portland. Come inside, he signed. Algorithm is already hiding under my desk, preparing to judge our new house guests. The interior of the townhouse took Lydia's breath away, not for its opulence, though the space was undeniably luxurious, but for how perfectly it embodied Julian's design sensibility. The historic shell of the building had been respectfully preserved, while the interior had been transformed into a flowing series of light-filled spaces that seemed to communicate with each other across varying levels and through carefully placed sight lines. Natural materials predominated, warm woods, stone, and textiles in earthy tones, while the occasional bold accent of color provided focal points that guided the eye through the space. It was a home designed by someone who understood deeply how people moved, interacted, and experienced their environment. Most striking to Lydia, however, were the countless subtle accommodations for nonverbal communication built seamlessly into the design, sightlines that allowed for visual contact between rooms, lighting perfectly positioned to illuminate hands and faces, even the arrangement of furniture that facilitated face-to-face interaction. Your home is beautiful, she signed, turning slowly to take in the central living area with its soaring ceiling and glass wall opening to a small but immaculate garden. Thank you, Julian replied. It's taken years to get it exactly right. It feels like you, Lydia observed, surprising herself with the intimacy of the observation. Thoughtful. Elegant. Attentive to detail. A pleased smile touched his lips. That may be the nicest compliment I've ever received about my work. Dad. Is this your cat? Willow called from across the room, where she had discovered a sleek gray feline watching them warily from beneath a modernist desk. That's Algorithm, Julian confirmed, crossing to kneel beside his daughter. She's very intelligent but a bit shy with new people. Let's give her time to get used to you. Willow nodded seriously, clearly treating this introduction with the gravity it deserved. Hello, Algorithm, she signed slowly, though of course the cat couldn't understand. I'm Willow. I promise I won't chase you or pull your tail. As if appreciating the consideration, Algorithm emerged slightly from her hiding place, yellow eyes assessing the small human with cautious interest. She likes you, Julian signed with evident pleasure. She usually takes hours to come out when there are visitors. That's because Willow has that effect on everyone, Lydia observed, watching as her daughter patiently extended a hand for the cat to sniff. Even the most reserved individuals seemed to open up around her. Like father, like daughter, Julian signed, his expression softening as he looked at Willow. Then, turning back to Lydia with a hint of self-consciousness, he added, would you like a tour? I can show you around while Algorithm and Willow become better acquainted. The tour revealed a home that was both showcase and sanctuary, each floor meticulously designed yet deeply livable. Julian's home office occupied most of the top floor, a light-filled studio space with drafting tables, state-of-the-art computer stations, and walls covered in sketches, models, and inspiration boards. One wall, Lydia noticed, was dedicated entirely to accessibility innovations, including several designs for enhanced communication tools for the deaf and hearing impaired. This is where I do most of my thinking, Julian explained as they stood in the center of the creative chaos. The formal offices of Sustainable Futures are downtown, but I prefer to work here when I'm in the conceptual stages of a project. I can see why, Lydia replied, moving to the window that overlooked the garden and neighboring rooftops. It feels separate. Peaceful. It was lonely, Julian signed, the candor of his statement catching her attention. Until recently. Before she could respond to this surprisingly vulnerable admission, they heard Willow calling from downstairs. "Mom! Dad! Algorithm let me pet her. And I found pictures of your buildings in a big book." They returned to the main living area to find Willow curled on the sofa with a large coffee table book of Julian's architectural works. The cat cautiously settled a foot away from her. "She's very smart," Willow informed them seriously. "She watched me looking at the pictures and then she came closer. I think she knows these are Dad's buildings." "She certainly knows my work when she sees it," Julian agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. "She supervises all my designs." The rest of the day passed in a comfortable rhythm of exploration and conversation. They took Willow to a nearby park where Julian was greeted with respectful nods by neighbors who, Lydia realized, must have been accustomed to respecting the famous architect's privacy. They visited a small bookshop where the owner communicated with Julian in fluent sign language and helped Willow find a book about New York's underwater infrastructure, tunnels, pipes, and submerged foundations that the 6-year-old found utterly fascinating. What struck Lydia throughout the day was how naturally Julian had created space for them in his life. Not just in the physical sense of his home, but in the routines and relationships that formed the fabric of his existence in New York. He had clearly given thought to what would interest Willow, which places would be comfortable for their first outings as a family, even which of his acquaintances would interact naturally with both a nonverbal adult and a curious child. That evening, after Willow had fallen asleep in the guest room that Julian had subtly but thoroughly prepared for a 6-year-old, complete with star-projecting night light and a selection of marine-themed stuffed animals, Lydia found herself alone with Julian on the rooftop terrace. The night was cool but not uncomfortable, the city spread around them in a tapestry of lights, the distant hum of traffic creating a soothing white noise. "Thank you for today," she signed, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "You've made Willow feel so welcome." "She makes it easy," Julian replied, settling into the chair beside her. "She approaches everything with such openness. Such trust. She gets that from you," Lydia observed. "That willingness to believe the best in people." Julian looked surprised. "You think so?" "I've always thought of myself as rather guarded. With most people, perhaps. But when you decide to let someone in," she hesitated, then continued, "you do it completely. Without reservation. It's what I first noticed about you that summer." A comfortable silence fell between them as they both recalled those early days of their relationship, the gradual building of trust, the discovery of shared understanding that had transcended verbal communication. "I've been thinking about what you said before," Julian signed finally, his movements measured and thoughtful in the dim light. "About how it felt like I'd made space for you in my life." "Yes. I want you to know it wasn't a recent accommodation. This space," his hands gestured to encompass not just the terrace but the home below. "It's always had room for you. For someone. Even when I didn't know who." The admission touched something deep within Lydia. For all his success, his wealth, his public recognition, there was a profound loneliness to Julian that she had sensed from the beginning, a solitude that went beyond his inability to speak, to the core of who he was. "After the accident," he continued, his hands moving with the careful precision he used when discussing difficult subjects, "when I lost my voice, I withdrew from almost everything. Everyone. I focused entirely on work because it was the one area where I felt I could still communicate effectively." Lydia nodded, encouraging him to continue. "That summer project, meeting you, it was the first time in months I had connected with anyone on a personal level. The first time I felt seen as more than just my disability or my professional accomplishments." He paused, his expression vulnerable in the soft lighting. "When you disappeared, it confirmed all my fears about letting someone that close." "Julian, I'm so sorry," Lydia signed, guilt washing over her again at the realization of how her actions had affected him. He shook his head. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I just want you to understand why finding Willow, finding you again, means so much to me. You both filled a space I had almost given up hoping could be filled. In the quiet intimacy of the moment, with the city spread beneath them like a sea of stars, Lydia found herself lowering the last of her defenses. I was so afraid, she admitted, her hands forming the words she had held back for years. Not just of what your world might mean for Willow, but of what you had come to mean to me. Julian leaned forward slightly, his attention focused entirely on her hands, her face. That summer, before I knew who you were, I had never felt so understood by anyone. So completely accepted. When I thought it had all been part of some research agenda, it wasn't just anger I felt, it was grief. Like I'd lost something precious that had never really existed. It existed, Julian signed firmly. It was real. I know that now, Lydia acknowledged, her hands steady despite the emotion behind her words. But it took me years to admit how much I missed that connection. How I kept looking for it in other relationships and never quite finding it. Julian's expression softened. And now? Lydia took a deep breath, her hands forming words that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Now I'm wondering if we can build something new. Not by trying to recapture what we had, but by creating something stronger, something that incorporates everything we've learned, everything we've become in the years between. The hope that bloomed across Julian's features made him look suddenly younger, more like the man she had known that summer. I'd like that, he signed simply. Very much. Their hands fell still as they sat together in the gathering darkness, not touching yet profoundly connected, two people finding their way back to each other through years of misunderstanding and separation. Above them, stars appeared one by one in the night sky, and below, the city continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the small miracles of human connection happening in its midst. The following days in New York established a pattern that would come to define their evolving relationship: thoughtful negotiation of boundaries, careful building of trust, and moments of surprising joy as they discovered how to be a family in this new configuration. Julian took them to his favorite places in the city, not the tourist attractions but the quiet corners he had discovered over years of solitary exploration, a community garden tucked between brownstones, a small museum dedicated to architectural models, a cafe run by a deaf couple where sign language was the primary mode of communication. Willow thrived under his attention, absorbing his knowledge of the city's hidden workings with the sponge-like capacity of childhood. She collected new signs from the deaf community members they met, adding them proudly to her journal and practicing them with dedicated concentration. Dad says New York is like a giant machine, she informed Lydia one evening as they prepared for bed. With all sorts of parts that have to work together. Like the subway and the water pipes and the electricity wires. That's a good way of thinking about it, Lydia agreed, helping her into her pajamas. He says Portland is more like a garden. Growing in its own special way. Willow's hands moved alongside her words, forming the descriptive signs Julian had taught her. I think I like both. The simple statement carried implications that Lydia wasn't quite ready to examine, the question of where and how their family would exist moving forward, divided between two cities and two very different ways of life. For his part, Julian was scrupulously careful not to pressure either of them, maintaining a respectful distance even as his feelings for Lydia clearly deepened. He had prepared a separate guest room for her, adjacent to Willow's, and though their evenings often ended in long conversations on the terrace or in the living room, he never presumed greater intimacy than she offered. It was Lydia who finally bridged that remaining distance, on their last night in New York. Willow had fallen asleep early, exhausted from their visit to the Sustainable Futures offices where Julian had shown her the models of his current projects and introduced her proudly to his team as, my daughter, the future marine biologist. After checking on her, Lydia found Julian in his study, working on what appeared to be modifications to a building design. She watched him for a moment from the doorway, struck by the intensity of his focus, the graceful precision of his hands as they adjusted elements on the digital model. When he noticed her, his face brightened immediately. Is Willow asleep? He signed. Completely. I don't think even algorithm walking across her face would wake her now. Julian smiled, saving his work and turning away from the computer. She's had quite a week. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. Not for her, Lydia replied, moving into the room. She absorbs new experiences like a sponge. It's remarkable to watch. She's remarkable, Julian agreed, his pride evident. Then, noting Lydia's thoughtful expression, he added, "Is everything all right? You seem preoccupied." Lydia took a seat in the chair opposite his desk, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking about what happens next. After we go home tomorrow." Julian nodded, his expression turning serious. "I've been thinking about that too. This week has been wonderful," Lydia signed, her movements conveying her sincerity. "Seeing you with Willow, watching how naturally you've incorporated us into your life here. But tomorrow we go back to Portland, to our apartment, our routines. You return to your work here. And we're back to weekend visits and video calls." "It doesn't have to be that way," Julian responded, his hands hesitant as if afraid of overstepping. "There are options we could consider. Such as, I could spend more time in Portland. Sustainable Futures has been considering a West Coast office for years. This could be the impetus to finally move forward with that plan." His hands moved with increasing confidence as he outlined the possibility. "Or, if you were open to it, you and Willow could spend more time here. Not permanently, not right away, but perhaps longer visits. There are excellent schools with strong deaf education programs. Your skills would be highly valued at several institutions in the city." Lydia felt a flutter of both excitement and anxiety at the possibilities he presented. "Those are significant changes to consider." "I know," Julian acknowledged. "And I'm not asking for decisions tonight. I just want you to know that I'm willing to restructure my life to be more present in yours and Willow's. Whatever that looks like." The readiness with which he offered to adapt his world to accommodate theirs touched Lydia deeply. This was perhaps the most profound difference between the Julian she had known 7 years ago and the man before her now, a willingness to prioritize connection over ambition, family over achievement. "What if we try something gradual?" she suggested, her hands forming the words as the idea took shape. "Extended visits in both directions. I can arrange some professional development leave from the education center. Willow's school has break coming up. We could spend a few weeks here, see how it feels for all of us." Julian's expression brightened with hope. "I think that's a wonderful approach. Thoughtful. Measured. And what about us?" Lydia signed, her hands betraying a slight tremor as she broached the subject they had been circling all week. "Not just as Willow's parents, but—" She trailed off, finding it strangely difficult to articulate the question despite her fluency in sign language. Julian rose from his desk and came to kneel before her chair, bringing their eyes to the same level, his gaze steady and earnest. "I love you, Lydia," he signed, the movements both statement and question. "I think I never really stopped, even during all those years apart. But what happens between us, the pace, the direction, that's for you to decide. I'm here, wherever here needs to be." The simple declaration, offered without pressure or expectation, was precisely what Lydia needed to hear. In that moment, the last of her hesitation dissolved, replaced by a certainty that had been building since that first night on her balcony in Portland. She reached out, her hands not signing but simply touching his face, a gesture more intimate than words could express. When she finally lowered her hands to respond, her movements were steady, decisive. "I love you too," she signed. "I think part of me has been fighting that truth for 7 years. I'm tired of fighting." The smile that transformed Julian's features was like sunrise after the longest night, brilliant with joy and the promise of new beginnings. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward until their foreheads touched, then their noses, and finally, with exquisite tenderness, their lips. The kiss deepened, 7 years of separation and misunderstanding dissolving in the simple, profound connection of two people finding their way back to each other. When they finally parted, Julian's hands moved between them, forming words that needed no sound to carry their weight. "Welcome home," he signed. "Both of you." As their relationship evolved over the following months, they discovered that building a family from such complicated beginnings required both patience and creativity. The extended visit to New York led to Julian spending several weeks in Portland, which in turn led to a summer where they divided their time between both cities. Practical considerations eventually necessitated more permanent arrangements. Julian established a satellite office of sustainable futures in Portland, allowing him to split his time more evenly between the coasts. Lydia took a sabbatical from the education center to explore opportunities in New York, eventually accepting a position as a consultant for a foundation developing inclusive education programs for deaf and hearing-impaired children. Willow, with the adaptability of childhood, thrived in their dual-city existence. She made friends in both places, developed favorite routines in each home, and seemed to find the arrangement perfectly natural. "I have 2 homes," she explained matter-of-factly to a curious classmate. "Just like some kids have 2 bedrooms if their parents live apart. Except my parents live together sometimes in both places." The media interest that had caused such anxiety in the early days of their reconnection gradually faded as their family became, in Julian's words, boringly normal. There were still occasional photographs, still moments when Julian's public profile brought unwanted attention, but these became manageable disruptions rather than defining challenges. More significant were the internal adjustments as they learned to function as a family unit. Julian, accustomed to solitude and independence, had to adapt to the joyful chaos of life with a growing child. Lydia, used to making all decisions regarding Willow's upbringing, had to learn to share that responsibility. Willow herself navigated the complex emotional terrain of having her father suddenly present in her life after years of absence. There were difficult moments, arguments about parenting approaches, tensions about career priorities, the occasional bout of insecurity as they each found their place in their new family configuration. But these challenges were met with the same thoughtful communication that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, hands expressing in silence what many couples failed to convey with all the words at their disposal. Life isn't always about dramatic revelations or grand gestures. Sometimes, the most profound stories are written in the quiet moments of daily connection, a family having breakfast together, a child's excited signing about a school project, a couple communicating across a crowded room with nothing more than a glance and subtle hand movements that speak volumes to those who understand their private language. If you've ever discovered that what you thought was lost forever was simply waiting to be rediscovered, I hope this story reminds you that second chances sometimes arrive in the most unexpected ways. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the complex beauty of human connection. It was on Willow's 8th birthday, almost 2 years after that fateful wedding reception, that Julian officially proposed to Lydia. The occasion wasn't marked by elaborate staging or public spectacle, but by a private moment of perfect understanding. They had spent the day celebrating at the Portland house, their primary residence during the school year, with a small party for Willow's friends followed by a family dinner. After the excitement had died down and Willow was tucked in bed, surrounded by new books and the model of a blue whale skeleton Julian had commissioned from a scientific illustrator, Lydia and Julian found themselves in the garden, enjoying the mild summer evening. "She's growing up so fast," Lydia sighed, a touch of wistfulness in her movements. "I can hardly believe she's 8 already." Julian nodded, his expression reflective. "I'm grateful for every moment, even the challenging ones. Especially knowing how much I missed." "You're making up for lost time," Lydia assured him, reaching across the small table to touch his hand. "She adores you." "And I adore both of you," Julian replied, his hands forming the words with deliberate care. "Which is why I wanted to ask you something tonight." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring unlike any Lydia had ever seen, not a traditional diamond solitaire, but an elegant band of mixed metals that twisted around themselves in a pattern reminiscent of hands signing, forever, in a continuous loop. "I had this made for you," Julian explained as Lydia stared in wonder at the piece. "The design is based on the sign for eternity, but modified to incorporate our initials in ASL finger spelling. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, so perfectly aligned with their unique history and mode of communication, brought tears to Lydia's eyes. Lydia Morgan, Julian signed, his hands steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because it's expected or conventional, but because I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you and Willow. Through tears of joy, Lydia's hands formed the simplest and most profound response, yes. 1,000 times, yes. They were married the following spring in the garden of their New York home, a small ceremony attended only by close friends and family. Willow served as flower girl for the second time in her young life, this time with the added responsibility of teaching the guests a special sign she and Julian had created together, a unique familial variation on "I love you" that incorporated elements of all their names. As they exchanged vows in the dual languages of their relationship, spoken words from Lydia, signed expressions from Julian, both translated for the gathering, Lydia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them to this moment. From that summer research project to the wedding where Willow had innocently exposed their secret, through misunderstandings and reconciliation, they had forged a connection that transcended conventional communication. The most powerful languages, she had discovered, weren't always those spoken aloud. Sometimes they were found in the eloquent movement of hands shaping meaning from thin air. Sometimes in the silent understanding between people who had learned to read each other's hearts. And sometimes, most profoundly, in the simple, unspoken trust of a child reaching across a crowded room to find her father, confident in the connection even before she fully understood it. I promise to listen not just with my ears, but with my heart, Lydia vowed, her hands moving alongside her spoken words. To remember that our greatest strength lies in the language we've created together. I promise to speak to you always with honesty and love, Julian responded, his hands forming the words with grace and precision. To build our life together with the same care I would design a structure meant to last for generations. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Willow beamed up at them, her small hands forming the words that had started their journey, my family. Complete at last. In the years that followed, their story continued to evolve, as all good stories do. Willow grew into a confident young woman with her father's analytical mind and her mother's compassionate heart, equally fluent in the languages of speech and sign. Julian's architectural practice expanded its focus on universal design, influenced by his personal experience navigating a world not always built for those who communicate differently. Lydia's work in deaf education gained national recognition, informed by her unique perspective as a bridge between hearing and non-hearing worlds. They faced challenges, of course, as all families do. The demands of Julian's career occasionally clashed with their desire for privacy. Willow went through phases of testing boundaries, asserting independence, and questioning her unusual family history. Lydia and Julian had disagreements, misunderstandings, moments of doubt. But through it all, they maintained the fundamental connection that had drawn them together from the beginning, the ability to truly see each other, to communicate beyond words, to find understanding in silence as well as in expression. On Willow's 16th birthday, Julian presented her with a special gift, a journal he had kept since the day he discovered she was his daughter, documenting his thoughts, feelings, and reflections as he navigated the unexpected journey of fatherhood. The final entry, dated on her birthday, ended with words that summed up the extraordinary path their family had traveled. The greatest designs are not those that follow a predetermined plan, but those that adapt to unexpected circumstances, finding beauty in the challenges, strength in the adjustments. You, my remarkable daughter, taught me that the most profound architecture is not found in buildings but in the careful, patient construction of relationships, especially those that begin with a moment of recognition across a crowded room, hands moving in a language that speaks directly to the heart. Sometimes the most powerful connections require no sound at all. Sometimes the hands speak what the voice cannot. And sometimes, a child's innocent gesture, reaching out to a father she somehow recognized despite never having met, becomes the bridge that allows healing to begin where words alone might have failed.